Design shapes the way you live. I'm Nico, an interior design expert focused on the connection between home and well-being. Using science, design, and professional expertise, I'll help you shape a space that elevates your mindset and enhances your well-being. Let's create space for better living, starting now. Today, we're uncovering one of the most overlooked tools in home design, observation. Often we arrange a room, step back, and call it done. But there's so much more beneath the surface. Our spaces impact our mood, productivity, and well-being in ways we might not consciously notice. When we take time to observe how we use a room, how we feel in it, and even what we ignore, we can make powerful adjustments to improve both functionality and comfort. This episode will guide you in developing an eye for these details, sharing practical steps for observing your space to create a home that truly supports you. Observation plays a crucial role in good design, especially when it comes to creating a home that supports your health and your well-being. When we're experiencing cognitive overload, meaning your focus and attention are stretched thin, it becomes harder to make decisions or notice when things aren't working in our space. This can affect both the functionality and the aesthetics of your home. Without the ability to properly observe, you might miss opportunities to improve your environment, even if it's impacting you on a deeper level. Studies suggest that our brains are trying to avoid cognitive overload. So naturally, you're not going to reassess your space without intentional observation, because your brain is trying to conserve energy. Your home will more or less fade into the background unless you intentionally observe it. I'm going to share a term with you. It's called habituation. Habituation, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, it's the process of people or animals becoming used to something so that they no longer find it unpleasant or think it is a threat. So we get used to things. Like I said, our spaces will fade into the background. Things can go unnoticed. We don't analyze, we don't critique. Sure, they may not be a threat, they may not be unpleasant, they may help us conserve energy by not paying attention to them or noticing them. But does that mean they should be left alone? Does that mean they can't be changed for the better? Does that mean they don't impact us in negative ways, or that we are potentially missing out on the positive ways they can impact us? How do we know what we need to change if we don't pay attention? How do we know if we feel good in the spaces we create if we don't stop and experience them and observe them in our bodies while we're in them? There's so much going on in our brains when we're experiencing our environment and our aesthetics. And the thing about our brains is it's not as obvious as our bodies, right? We can't feel our brains rewiring or sending certain signals, but we can feel our shoulders raise or our breath pattern change or our hands clench. We might get a headache, or it could be the opposite. We could feel our shoulders relax. We could feel tension leave our bodies. We could feel calmness or excitement in a good way. We could have improved awareness. Like our senses might feel like they're more acute. And this is why observation in design is so important. Have you ever looked at a piece of art and been like repulsed or felt really uncomfortable in what you were looking at? Maybe it was the subject matter or the colors or the style that just didn't resonate with you. I once read that a lot of early painters would paint subjects in a way to cause discomfort to their viewers. I think it was not like to turn them away, but it was to really cause them to think. It was to cause them to have a reaction. The art itself wasn't always painted because it was a subject that the artist just loved or was drawn to. But the early painters were exaggerating things to almost make a point and to document things. And I only say this because when I learned this, it made me look at art a bit different at times. It's like the research says we are more comfortable with curves over angles. Angles are more complex and our brains sort of prefer easy, right? Or at least our brains like things to be just efficient. to conserve energy. But then it's also said that the longer you look at a complex angle, the more pleasing it might become. And there was studies done where they looked at high achievers and academics, and it suggested that they prefer angles because of their complexity. So if we look at things and they cause us to feel a bit uncomfortable, then you might want to ask yourself, what's going on here? What is it about this or that that's causing discomfort, that's causing me to have a particular reaction? What observations are you making within your body? Years ago, an architect, Suchi Reddy, she did an interactive installation in conjunction with Google, and it was called A Space for Being. And they kind of designed 3 uniquely different rooms, and the participants could walk through and experience these rooms. And it was all done with neuroaesthetics in mind. And they were given wristbands that measured their specific physical and physiological responses. And this one participant, which I found really interesting, said that they were drawn to one particular room over the others. But when they looked at their data, their body actually responded different to that room. It actually didn't prefer, according to their body's experiences, it didn't prefer that room. So they had initially thought that they preferred it, but when they looked at the data, it didn't line up. And when I read this, it made me wonder how closely they were observing their body language and their physical reactions as they were moving through the space. Maybe it could have been a style that they thought they liked, or perhaps was like reinforced through social media, or I think maybe they were a design professional. So it could have also been influenced by a current project or simply what they were exposed to design-wise on a daily basis. And maybe the longer they spent in that room, maybe their opinion would have changed. Maybe had they spent a bit more time in the room, I don't know how long they spent there, maybe that time would have changed how they felt or what they initially thought on that room. And maybe it would have then matched their physiological responses. And I just want to stop here for a second. I want to point out, and this may not have been the case for this particular person, that styles and trends over time can make us feel like we really like them. They can actually cause us to feel aligned with a particular look. Like it's being reinforced, right? It can be easy. It can be safe. It can convince you that it's right for you. Your eyes can essentially deceive you. But is it authentic when you think you like something? I mean, we don't have the wristbands to measure how our physiological responses are going. We just go off of what we initially think when we look at something. But when we don't analyze it and observe how our body's responding, we have to question if it's authentic. If it doesn't fit the context of your life, if it's not in line with your story or your values, your aspirations, then you could essentially be living a lie. I say that lightly, but there's truth to it. You have to be looking at it in a way where you're questioning how authentic it is. And the only way you can question that is by observing how you feel and how your body's responding. I would say the ways our bodies respond to our environment, the things we like, the things we want to improve on, the goals that we have, our habits, all of it, that's authentic to us. When we observe and pay attention to how our bodies are responding to an environment, then we can actually start to make choices to support that. So how can you practice observation to enhance your health and well-being through interior design? Well, the way you've set your home up, if that doesn't support you or is not in line with how your brain and your body will be affected, if there's friction in the environment, then you will feel it on a visceral and a cerebral level. And the only way you get to customize your interiors to support you is if you start paying attention, if you start observing how you're responding to your immediate environment. So as we talk about observation and home design and what you can do, observation is going to be the first step. And I'm going to share a few ways that you can start to implement this and start to really be thinking about it as you're critiquing your spaces. And I think just to point out that so often you're just living your busy, busy life and your home has sort of receded into the background and you're not experiencing it in any sort of intentional ways, then this is really important to just start experiencing it and start observing how you move through your home. And this needs to happen before you make any changes, because I think if you're sort of recognize that perhaps you want your space to look different than it currently looks, and then you haven't taken the time to observe and be intentional about it, then what ends up happening is you do gravitate to the easiest thing, and that's a trend that you're seeing that's the same look as maybe somebody that you admire. So then you go out to the store and you're just sort of regurgitating that trend or that style without really understanding if it's the right thing for you. We're going to start with some practical things that you can do. So the first thing we're going to talk about is flow. If you're thinking you might want to say rearrange your room or change things up, you want to first observe how you're moving through your spaces. And when you're moving through, are there any areas that feel inefficient or feel obstructed? Do you feel like you're kind of having to squeeze by certain things, or even are you sort of naturally turning sideways as you move through a room? You know, when you start observing and analyzing, then it allows you to critique if the flow of a space is right for how you use it. And it's really not just about how just you use it, but do you share your home with anyone? And if you do, start observing how they move through the space. What's their natural traffic patterns? Do they come into a room a certain way and do they leave a certain way? And then when they're doing that, how are they doing that? Pay attention to their body language and get them involved in the conversation. Get them to start observing how they feel as they move through. Because, you know, you want to create zones for certain activities, and you want to make sure that those zones are designated for the intended purpose. So you want to get those right so that the design of the home and the way that you're using your home is really specific to the tasks that you're using it for. So creating flow and observing your traffic patterns is really key. The next thing I would say is to start observing your habits in each space. For instance, is the kitchen designed for efficient meal prep? Or do you feel strain as you reach for things in the kitchen? Or perhaps while you're cooking, you can't get to things fast enough, or maybe you're bumping into people when you're moving from one place to another. But these are the sort of things that these sort of habits and the ways that you use a space can really impact you and frustrate you, and you might not even be picking up on it. So you want to start observing these sort of little annoyances. Do you have habits of leaving things out, or not putting things away, or maybe it's going away but it's in the wrong spot, so then the next time you go to try to find it, you can't? You have to recognize if your spaces are aligned with their intended functions. If you want to change a habit, like let's say checking your phone too much, think about creating other habits like reading a real book instead of reading a book on your phone. And then you can take it a step further and make a certain place in a room or an entire room a tech-free space to sort of reinforce that new habit you'd like to create. So I think it's really key to start observing your habits in each space and pay attention to how they make you feel, right? I mean, cluttered spaces, they lead to stress, while often open, airy rooms can be more calming. So observe things like your lighting and the colors and the textures, and then how what habits you have within those spaces. The next thing is to observe how much clutter you have. And if you kind of declutter, you'll have enhanced focus. Often the items that we don't use regularly are overlooked. And as I talked about earlier, where things sort of, go unnoticed, that's just sort of what happens. It's the backdrop. It just kind of recedes into the background and you stop paying attention and noticing these things. So if you're not using things regularly, maybe think about getting rid of them, moving them somewhere else, really decluttering, whether that looks like you're actually getting rid of stuff or you're just reorganizing things so that it makes better sense. Your brain is working hard to filter them out. So do your brain a favor and help it so that it doesn't have to fight with that clutter. So really look at ways to simplify your space and reduce the cognitive load. This will help with creating just more calming environments. The next thing is to really pay attention to your lighting. If you've been listening to this podcast, you've probably heard me talk about natural light and just how I love when my attention is drawn to shadows on the wall or the light that comes in a window. So really observing how natural light moves through your home throughout the day and try to maximize your exposure to morning sunlight, which can help with your circadian rhythms and your sleep-wake cycles, and it can help boost your mood. Try with artificial lighting to use warmer lights where you can. Cooler lighting is great for high focus areas like a home office. But when you're trying to relax, you really, really want to use warm lights. You want it to sort of mimic the afternoon and the early evening light where it's warm and it's more inviting. And this is actually called Kelvin. And I'll talk about this in another episode if you're unaware of it, but there's a Kelvin rating. It's like the color temperature of certain lights, and certain lights, which are the cooler ones, mimic daylight in like the sense of earlier in the day where the color temperature is cooler. And it's said to help us to stay more alert, stay awake. So you can imagine if you're trying to create a relaxed environment, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the color of your lights, using something that's warm or dimmable in those areas that you want to use for relaxation, like a bedroom, for instance. So I wanted to share a personal story where I had to use the power of observation to analyze and change a routine and a habit of mine to alleviate some serious stress. I mean, I've had to do this many times where I found that simply observing and paying attention to it caused me to change something in my interiors for the better. But this one particular time was significant because it was very clearly affecting my health in negative ways. So at the time, I was working for a small design firm, and it was just me and the owner working on the company at the time. And we decided to take on this massive project. And it was the type of project where sort of neither of us had really done it before. And to be honest, I was really pushing for us to take it on because it was a big project. It was exciting in so many ways. And it meant we could then go after these types of projects. But because it was a new kind of project for us, I didn't realize just how much it would break me because I was so just focused on getting that experience. So I had been working from home and we had turned our spare bedroom into my office, which had been working out really well up until this project. Anyway, for whatever reason, the design consultants, had been brought in on the project late. So it was already well underway, which meant the timelines were intense. And there was a couple other consultants. There was an architect and a contractor that gave me tons of grace, which helped the stress just a little bit. But it was such an unbelievably stressful time. And there were many nights where I was working into the early hours and it felt like I could just walk 10 feet from my desk and land on my pillow. And days off were me trying to stay away from that room. And I had to walk past it several times just to get to other areas of our place. And the other thing is there were things in that room that I needed to get to regularly. So it was really hard to separate myself from that room. But I started to recognize that I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't eating properly in the sense of taking proper breaks and leaving my desk to sit down and eat lunch. And my stomach was just in knots when I was working. I was constantly rushing, going against deadlines and wondering if I had all the information and if I was doing it as well as I could be. And I knew that if I was going to continue working from home through this project, I would need to change what I could change. So I started to observe what was adding to my negative health effects. So I started questioning, how could I separate work from home life when I'm working from home, and I needed to get my home back as best as I could. I needed it to be my sanctuary again, my place to retreat to, because at that point, if I simply just walked past that room and saw my laptop or saw a glimpse of a drawing or paperwork, it just put me right back in work mode. And often it was like a downward spiral because I'd start working in my head. It literally felt at times that there was no separation. I knew this was becoming a problem and that I really needed to address this in some way. So I observed that my brain and my body associated that room and everything in it with work. I observed that I hadn't been putting boundaries up on working hours. So I often would find myself back in that room writing things down or pulling up my to-do list or whatever it was. I was able to work in the night because it was accessible. It was too easy to go back in there. So right away, I decided I would set my work hours. So I had a whiteboard in that room. So I started by writing down what my work times were. My office hours, basically. I then put those hours on a sign on the door, and I had an open and close sign that I would turn over at the end of the day. I started to mentally separate myself from my work. And I knew, as silly as it was to put an open, close sign on the door, I knew my brain and my body needed that ritual. I observed how I felt when I crossed that threshold, which helped me to not look back until I was ready, until I was rested and recharged the next day. I started to reassure myself when thoughts crept in and the temptation to look or write something down. I would just remind myself, just trust your notes, trust your process, and you can circle back to this tomorrow. But if something did pop in my mind and I just needed to jot it down, I would simply write it down, put that paper away and leave it. And I would have confidence that I would come back to it the next day in the morning at the start of my workday, not a minute before. I wanted to do really good on that project. I wanted the design to be amazing. I wanted to be punctual in my deliverables, but I also knew that alongside that, I had to learn how to protect and create space. And I wanted to share this story particularly because as we're talking about observing, I want you to understand the power of observation in home design. If you observe how you're responding to your space and the routines within, then you can alter your space and your routines to support you in any way you need. I started by observing my body and my habits. And it was pretty obvious I needed to make some changes to support my health and well-being. So as I wrap up today's episode, I just kind of want to leave you with 3 key takeaways that I want you to remember. The first one is the role of observation. So living in a space helps reveal its true functionality. Observation over time can identify subtle design issues and ways you can improve flow and purpose. The second one is some cognitive science insights. I want you to remember that our brains naturally overlook elements in familiar spaces, so intentional observation is crucial. The third one is practical action steps. I want you to learn how to analyze room use, traffic patterns, and sensory responses to make meaningful adjustments. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you're inspired to start observing your space with fresh eyes. Remember, a little observation can make a big difference in creating a home that truly supports your well-being. Until next time. Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the support the show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.